A group of people marked by God for protection. Angels spreading the gospel message. The final judgment of humanity at the end of the tribulation.
Revelation chapter 14 continues to show both the great love and the grace of God, and the consequences of denying God and the severity of his wrath.
Welcome to Live Life in the Spirit. We are your hosts. I'm Pastor Penny Schulz.
And I'm Kristen Scharrenberg. I am Kristen Scharrenberg.
And I'm Pastor Penny Schulz. And welcome to
Live Life in the Spirit. So before we get started today, we just want to let you know you can listen on many of the podcast feeds. You can find us on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, and many more. And we are at Live Life in the Spirit on all of those.
You can also watch us on our YouTube channel or on Rumble, TikTok, all at Live Life in the Spirit. All of our content, including some really inspiring blogs, are also on our website at livelifeinthespirit.com, where you can also get a t-shirt that shows how God is still writing your story. Yeah, you just need to quit stealing the pen.
It's true. And if you want more inspiring content or some great ways to introduce the gospel message to kids with Magic to the Gospels, you can go to Penny's YouTube channel at Penny Schulz without the T.
We're going to dive right in today to chapter 14 of the book of Revelation. Now, this naturally kind of breaks into 3 different sections. So that's how we're going to tackle it today. So we're going to just read part of the scripture and we're going to look at that, and then we'll just move on to each section.
That's right. So it starts out with the Lamb and the 144,000. Then I looked, and there before me was the Lamb, standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a sound from heaven like the roar of rushing waters, and like a loud peal of thunder. The sound I heard was like that of harpists playing their harps.
And they sang a new song before the throne, before the 4 living creatures and the elders. No one could learn the song except the 144 who had been redeemed from the earth. These are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they remain virgins. They followed the Lamb wherever he goes, and they were purchased from among mankind and offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths, and they are blameless.
So if we dive right in, the Lamb on Mount Zion with 144,000 who have his name and his father's name written on them. There's a lot to unpack just in that sentence.
There is.
So who's the Lamb?
The Lamb is Jesus Christ, of course.
And how do we know that?
Because he's actually referenced as the Lamb 26 times in just the book of Revelation alone.
That's true. They make it pretty clear, and that seems to be his favorite title, given this is his revelation. So then we have Mount Zion, and there's some debate among scholars and Christians and probably Jews. What's that referring to?
Well, there is some difference in opinion. Some people believe that it's Mount Zion on earth. Others believe that it's talking about the Mount Zion of the New Jerusalem. But the problem is he talks about he's seen on heaven and he sees on earth. And
he hears from heaven, a voice from heaven. Right.
So it's probably more likely saying it is Jerusalem, the Mount Zion right here on earth.
The physical. And, I mean, it's referred to 160 times. Mount Zion is Jerusalem. And only twice when it's something else. So probably a safe bet. And as we've talked about before, Revelation isn't in chronological order. And this book previews the return of Christ, but that doesn't happen until chapter 19. Mm-hmm. And the Battle of Armageddon. So it's just bringing in a preview of what's to happen and then also offering,
well, hope through this whole thing, because it's been doom and gloom, kind of, other than the throne room.
Right.
It's been kind of nasty.
Right.
And then we're going to get into even more nasty stuff. So 15 gets into more of the 7 judgments, but this is the little hiccup right here is just kind of showing that in all of this, it doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
There's still hope. There's still a way to be redeemed. There's still
God is still protecting people. We have the opportunity, and he's going to provide as many opportunities as possible for
And he's
for
still looking
salvation.
out for the Jewish nation, trying so hard to get them to turn their heads and their hearts towards him.
Absolutely.
So John sees with Jesus the 144,000. Now that's introduced to them when?
In chapter 7, we heard first about them. They represented the 12 tribes of Israel, and in that they said there were 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes. Probably not specifically that exact number of people.
More just kind of that completion, that representation, and in honor of that, I have my breastplate of the 12 tribes of Israel.
With the 12 stones.
Mm-hmm.
When they're talking about the armor of God, that's what the breastplate looks like.
That is right. And the difference here is that what's so unique about this 144,000?
They are marked for protection by God, and they have, we hear about that in chapter 7, but in chapter 14 we get to hear how they were marked, and I think that's awesome. They have Jesus' name and God's name on their foreheads.
We see this all the way back to chapter 9, actually, because before the gates of hell are opened up, before anybody can be tormented, what had to take place?
That God marked those that were not to be tormented.
Those who had accepted him. Yep.
That were in the book of life, the Lamb's book of life.
And so this whole area that we're going to be looking at, like we said, this isn't in chronological order. So the first 3.5 years of the Antichrist, when he is coming into power, so to speak, there's 2 other people that we looked at that are on the scene. And who are they?
Those 2 witnesses.
So God, from the very beginning, we said he is constantly trying to give people the gospel message if they will hear. And so that's what the 2 witnesses did. That whole time that they were on the scene, they were telling the gospel message, but what were happening?
They were being persecuted. No one was listening. They were getting mad.
Yes, they hated him with a passion. Yet God still continued.
Mm-hmm.
So this 144,000, though, are probably those who did come to Christ because of hearing the gospel message through those 2 witnesses. And then they have a job that they're gonna have to fulfill. What is that job?
Well, because eventually those 2 witnesses get called back up, so to speak, and so they're going to continue to evangelize the gospel message until until they're martyred or killed, or until the end.
So it doesn't just happen right away for all of them. There is that representation that God is going to protect through this whole duration that he has planned out. Mm-hmm. So that way they can continue to spread the gospel message, because he's always used people to do the evangelizing.
That's right. Although there will be a change in that plan. We'll hear about in just a minute. So it's interesting. It also talks about the fact that they remained virgins, and it goes on to talk about kind of their purity and they're blameless. Is that literal?
No. This isn't just the only men that have not been married or anything. In Isaiah is actually chapter 37, verse 22, is when it talks about Israel being the virgin daughter of Zion. And so that's kind of, again, this is that representation, and so it means that they're blameless and they're pure and they've held themselves. Well, when you think of a virgin, they've been pure, they have not defiled themselves. Well, as Israel, these are the marked ones that did not defile themselves with worshiping the beast.
Right.
Worshiping that image, that idol.
They stayed pure during this tribulation period.
We've seen that throughout all of history. Mm-hmm. Those that didn't defile themselves by worshiping the idol of King Nebuchadnezzar, those who did not worship the foreign kings, those who did not worship the foreign gods or the temples and the high places, those that kept themselves pure unto God.
And if you think about even earlier in when we talked about the letters to the churches, that was one of the things he talked about, their purity for those that did not fall victim to those.
And this is linking those.
Absolutely.
sometimes it's really hard that when you read through this book, you forget that because it's not chronological order, it's referring to all these other things back before. So as we get into the throne room, if you remember in chapter 4 and chapter 5, and like you said, with the different aspects of the letters, all these things here are connecting. It's the same thing that it's talking about, the same scene, the same...
It's just presenting it over and over again in different views, different time frames.
When these actually become martyred, it said the saints that were under the altar. We kind of looked at that a little bit last week.
Right.
That they were the ones crying out. That's these that are crying out.
Sure. Well, and even in the New Testament, in 2 Corinthians, chapter 11, verse 2, Paul says he longs to present the church to Christ as a virgin daughter. So this idea of purity, not by anything we've done, but through Christ. Because blameless is not sinless. It's that we don't hold the responsibility for our sin any longer.
And we're not righteous on our own. It's only through Christ that we are made righteous. And it did talk about the first fruits, that they would be presented as the first fruits. When did we say that Jesus resurrected?
First fruits.
On the 8th day, technically, on the day after Shabbat of Passover, Seder, it was first fruits. Because what is about first fruits that's so unique?
So whatever they take and harvest that day, that is offered as a sacrifice, and it sanctifies everything else, the rest of the harvest.
So that which is consecrated, everything after it,
consecrated.
The whole thing is consecrated. Yeah. And that's what they're talking about. So are they talking about the Christians here? No, because most of the Christians have already been raptured, and then those that are still left, they will be martyred. But this is talking about the Jewish people, because Christians don't go by first fruits. No. They don't follow the Hebrew tradition. So he's saying right here, this is language that they understood.
Sure.
That this 144 is now consecrating everyone else that's going to come to Christ because of their gospel message.
Sure.
That's kind of cool.
That is really cool. Great way that he just continues to use those things that they would understand even today because of the continuation of those traditions within the Jewish faith.
You know, another thing when you think about that is that, of course, the only way to get to heaven is through salvation in Jesus Christ. It's by grace and faith alone in Him. But the rewards that are mentioned so many times and talked about that we receive, that was what was going on here. That because of doing this, because of all these people being consecrated after them, it's kind of neat that even in the end, even when they missed the boat so many times before,
for so long,
that still by being faithful and receiving God's mark and doing the call of God, no matter how, it's not going to be easy.
No.
It is going to be very tough. It's going to be brutal. It's going to be horrible. It's going to be probably like during the Holocaust in a way. Those people who stayed faithful and continued to hold fast. But in the end, we're going to see that they are rewarded in heaven.
So I really like in verse 3, it talks about they sang a new song before the throne. A voice of many waters and thunder. I love the imagery with which John tries to describe in human words what I just don't think we have the words to describe. He didn't have the capacity,
He didn't have surround sound. Stadium seating. I guess it did have the Coliseums. But
that's right. Dolby Digital wasn't there.
That's right. Well, and they talk about the sea. And I thought about that last week when we were talking about the Antichrist rising up out of the sea. It didn't mention it, but it has bugged me all week about that. And that the false prophet rises from the land. It could be two things, I think. One, you have the man who is the Antichrist, who is rising from the sea of humanity, which was his human self. But it is a play, I think, because rising from the sea, the abyss was always called the sea. When Satan enters him, or we know that he becomes a Pollyanna, which is going to come out of the abyss, you have that two juncture. It just didn't talk about that. I wanted to, and it's
then
bugged me.
The sea is the chaos dragon. All of that.
It's all of it. All of it. So here we see that this 144 is around that sea of glass. It's humanity, and here we're talking about the voices. Yes, I can imagine
what that would sound like.
What, gazillions? That's beyond trillion? Is that gigabytes? Okay, I don't know what's beyond the tera. So
I guess.
We're beyond tera.
I guess. Yeah, I don't know. That's over my pay grade.
Voices singing.
Well, and it's, it sounded like harpists playing their harps. I mean, he just used all the words that he could think of, rushing waters and thunder and harpists playing the harps, just to try to describe what that would sound
like.
But
that's actually a little more literal than just figurative with the harps.
It's true, because there are harpists in the throne room.
And it's the ones that are these 144. So when you've ever heard, when you die, you're going to get angel's wings and you're going to get a harp and you're going to be on a cloud, and people are like, why do I want to do that?
Right.
Well, that's not where the majority of us are going to be or what we're going to be doing. But they get this from this particular passage, and it's kind of in two places. And it's talking about those who have not defiled themselves, who have still remained pure, and they're this 144 collective, that they will receive a harp. But it's the new song that they're going to sing.
And only they can learn it. I thought that was interesting. Only they can sing it.
And it's the song of Moses and the Lamb. We're going to see that more. Chapter 15. This is kind of jumping ahead.
Okay.
But that's going to come into chapter 15 is the song of Moses and the Lamb. And it's actually a particular song that I happen to know because our choir sang it. And it's kind of cool. It's called the Magnificat. But how neat is that? We'll get into that a little more. But those two chapters coincide.
They do. So we'll dive in now to the next section of scripture from this chapter. Then I saw another angel flying in midair, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. He said in a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water."
A second angel followed him. Fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries. A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives its mark on their forehead or on their hand, they too will drink the wine of God's fury, which has been poured out full strength into the cup of his wrath. They will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb."
So this second part is talking about angels. They're entering the scene and helping. So there's an angel flying the everlasting gospel to all. This is new.
This is really exciting. What a lot of people don't realize, and why is this so unique? Up to this point, who's the only one who can spread the gospel?
People. We've been the only ones doing it thus far.
We've been the iglesias, the evangelists, that's where we get Anglos, we get angels, but evangelism, all that comes from there. It's the gospel message, and we have been the one to do it. But here, why would the angel be the one going around proclaiming the gospel message?
Well, at this point in time, there's not a whole lot of us left. About half the world's population is gone.
So like 4 trillion?
4 billion people, I
4 billion
think,
people
are dead and gone. The church was raptured. Most of the Christians who are converted during this time are martyred, potentially enslaved. It talks about the fact there's slavery during this time. I mean, it's not great. But this is this beautiful opportunity to show God's love and grace again. Because when there's not a lot of people left, what does he do? He literally sends an angel.
Well, and obviously the 144,000 are gone too.
Right.
The witnesses are gone. This is that last 3.5, the 42 months.
Maybe even shorter time than that. We don't know. But
There
it's
is
definitely
nobody left.
towards the end. Yeah.
And so in order to give that hope, in order to still give everybody the last possible moment, you have this angel that's flying throughout all the world, which is a parallel to what? Because they're going to be speaking in every language that everybody can hear anyway.
To me, it makes me think of Pentecost, where the apostles stood up there and they were preaching in their own tongue, but everybody could hear it
in their own native tongue.
Right.
So, those people who say, well, I can't believe God did it. What about the person that is in the jungle, or the person on the deserted island, or the person hiding off in the cave? How are they going to hear the gospel? There is absolutely no excuse.
Right.
None.
God is providing every opportunity.
The witnesses have been broadcasted on news media. There's no reason they didn't hear that. You have the 144 that are continuing to go out. God has given so many opportunities. And think about this. This is why we're doing this. I think our biggest audience, to be completely honest, is not you and us, the listeners, but it's going to be for the remnant that are left. Those that are going to, somehow God is going to use, while YouTube is being really pared down and tight, I think that he is going to cause a miracle, that people are going to be able to find these lessons, these programs from so many teachers, because they're going to be wondering, and they're going to have the opportunity to hear the gospel message and turn to Christ. But even those who don't, God still makes a way, so that way there is no excuse that anyone could possibly say that they have not heard the gospel message.
Right. He's not missing one single lost sheep. So then another angel number 2 in this particular section, is going around and saying that Babylon has fallen.
And that's referencing to what we're going to look at in chapter 17, where we did a little bit in 13.
Right.
This is the Antichrist's global economy. This is that world government system that's just going to fall to pieces. And that's why I said, when they talk about the revived Roman Empire, and I argued it was the Babylonian Empire, because right here we have Babylon has fallen, the great. That's what it really is all about. I mean, it's from the beginning to the end. Again, everything, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last, from good and bad, you see it throughout the entire Bible.
Right. And Babylon is just referenced so much, and we talk about that, it's hard to think that it could be anything but that. And I just think it's great that they're letting them know right now that they're not going to make it.
It's a problem. It's just going to be gone.
It's not going well for you.
They think that they hold all the power, they hold all the dominion, and yet it's going to fall to pieces. I think there's a Patsy Cline song titled I Fall to Pieces.
Maybe that's what she was talking about.
There you go.
So diving back in at verse 11, and the smoke of their torment will rise forever and ever. There will be no rest, day or night, for those who worship the beast in its image, or for anyone who receives the mark of its name. This calls for patient endurance on the part of the people of God who keep his commands and remain faithful to Jesus.
And then I heard a voice from heaven say, "Write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them."
So this is interesting, because this is another place where it's talking about the fact that our works mean something in heaven. And they mean something when it comes time to judgment.
So this part right here is just a little bit of a bridge from that what we're talking about with the 144 and the people that are left, and then it's moving into this next part of what Christ is going to do.
And hey, it's not a bridge to nowhere.
It's true.
So
Because it's not government funded.
Way to go, now we're going to get deleted. Diving back in at verse 14, I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like a son of man, with a crown of gold on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Then another angel came out of the temple and called in a loud voice to him who was sitting on the cloud, "Take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." So he who was seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested.
Another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Still another angel who had charge of the fire came from the altar and called in a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle. Take your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of grapes from the earth's vine, because its grapes are ripe. So right here we see that this is like the dual harvest that's going on. You have the harvest of those that are the first fruits. You have those who did not accept the seal or the number of the beast or the image, did not worship him. But then we're gonna start seeing here with the other angels that they're harvesting then those who did, and it said they will be tormented, and it's gonna be horrible, horrible, horrible for those that are still left.
I guess it just goes to show that even up to the very end, there are still people who are coming to Christ.
Exactly.
And so that's why God sends the angel. That's all of it, because any and every last one who's willing to come to him, he'll do whatever he can to get them.
And there's going to be people that hear the call, that are going to feel like, I can't help but think of Jesus on the road to Emmaus. That whole, we're not our hearts burning within us. I mean, this is the last call, literally. And you brought up an interesting thought earlier today. It's not just the last call for people, but maybe, possibly, who knows, it could be the last call for
the fallen angels. You know, we've discussed the fact that it talks about in Enoch that there's not hope for the 200, potentially, for salvation for them, or that they didn't want to have to, like, they didn't feel bad. They felt bad that they got caught, kind of thing. But if there are...
And that was at that time.
Right.
Because it was right at that time that they were asking, and God says, no, there's no redemption. But we're talking, millennial.
I have a hard time with a God who loves his creation so much that he did so much for humanity that he wouldn't do the same for the angels that he also created with just as much love.
And we kind of see really in the scriptures, the only one that it says is there's really no redemption for is Azazel. And yes, one could argue Satan. I mean, again, I think there are several people who vied for that position. There's going to be several.
Right.
But it's not that they couldn't be redeemed, I don't think. It's that their heart is just so hardened from the very beginning that they just flat out refuse.
Right.
And it's not just angelic realm. We see that with people.
Oh, absolutely.
There's some people that it doesn't matter how bad things get, they're still going to turn their back on God, and it's just going to harden, like Pharaoh, it's going to harden their heart even more.
Right. Well, and the other thing that this chapter really highlights is, yes, God offers more than ample opportunities for us to turn back to him, return to him, and worship Christ and ask for forgiveness and accept him. But if we don't, there is that line in the sand, and there will come a time when judgment happens. And if you choose to worship the beast, if you choose to take that mark, then you will spend eternity in hell. I mean, it is clear, it is black and white on that.
And people say, how could a loving God do that? Well, hello, sometimes the reason why all of this, throughout all of Revelation, the trials, the tribulations, the plagues, these are for all the people who refused in the first place. And sometimes it takes, you know who you are. Those of you who it took something so severe to finally bring you to your knees before you would come to Christ.
Your rock bottom was a little bit harder to find.
Or it was a little deeper and a little harder at the bottom. That's kind of where we're at. These are those who just dig in all the harder and refuse and refuse and refuse. And yet God still keeps trying. That's the kind of God we serve.
When if you think about it, I mean, we can understand a smidgen of it as parents. I mean, I look at God as the ultimate example of parents, and the one that I try to set my example on as a parent. He doesn't let us just get away with whatever. He corrects us along the way, and he offers love and grace and mercy and all of that. But it reaches a point where enough is enough, and he can't continue to just let it go on into all eternity, because then we never get to rest in paradise.
Well, and he can't reward those who refuse to accept him when everyone else has. I mean, this is not a participation ribbon contest.
No,
this
it is not.
I was born, I was on life, and in life, and so we all get the same. No, it's not that way.
No, the Bible makes it abundantly clear. So at verse 19, the angel swung his sickle on the earth, gathered its grapes, and threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath. They were trampled in the winepress outside the city, and blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as the horses' bridles for a distance of 1,600 stadia.
Or it would be furlongs, which is like 180 miles. Israel's only 200 miles long, so this is more of a representation, I think, of showing from one end to the end of the other, basically. That part. But sometimes we get kind of caught up to the horses' bridles. It could be, I don't know. This is where some people differ on how that's all going to play out. But this, I wanted to bring up this little part of the scripture. Actually, is a very well-known song.
And it's funny because it is a song that is one of my dad's favorite songs. I grew up, my mom would play it and we would all sing it. I had no idea what I was singing about. I don't think I'll look back on those times as fondly now. It's the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. So, that the glory of him coming down on that white cloud. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored.
He has loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Yeah, it's unbelievable. That's, when you sing this your whole life and you let go and then you read Revelation, you go, oh my gosh,
it's right here. And then you're going, ew.
Wait a minute, why am I singing this song?
I shouldn't be singing this with such gusto. Yeah.
But what is the gusto? Because it's finally come to that. God has given every opportunity possible, and this is the very end. And this is Armageddon in the sense that God has said, enough is enough. And this is right before Christ comes back again. This is not chronological because we've got several other chapters before chapter 19. But John's just given this little preview that there is going to come a time when the rubber meets the road and God says done.
Right.
And there is going to be that harvest. There's going to be angels that are going to be
participating in that harvest. It's talking about, behold, a white cloud, and on it was like the Son of Man with a crown and a sickle. So we have this image, again, sort of foreshadowing chapter 19 when Jesus returns on the white cloud. But a sickle in his hand.
He's actually really returning on a white horse, so it's interesting that it's cloud in one and a horse in another. We'll see that in 19. Then also there's a lot of speculation on what the white cloud could actually represent. If it's the cloud of witnesses that he comes back on, because we know he's riding on a white horse. Of course, that doesn't come until 19.
Well, it does say that he comes with that we're all going to be riding on white horses.
Which could look like a thunderhead, a cloud in the distance.
Absolutely.
But now the crown. Okay, so you may say, okay, so he's coming on a cloud, which means it would be that perfection. The crown, the gold crown, is representing victory, that he is coming back and his kingship and all that stuff. But the sickle then represents
the harvest
and the authority.
And I think it's cool, I don't know, that's probably a silly word, that an angel gets to come out and tell Jesus, it's time. It's time.
It's ripe for the harvest. It's ready. Now is the time.
But the imagery though it's a little violent. He thrusts the sickle on the earth. That doesn't sound
well, but that's authority. So when you think, okay, it's all in how you look at it. You have to think of this from an agriculture point of view. If you are the farmer and you are going out into the wheat field or the grapes, right? And you were to thrust your sickle through, you're not damaging the grain.
That's true.
You are cutting the stems so that way you can harvest.
And so you're taking away what holds us to earth and bringing us into what comes next.
So if you would think about the rapture, that's kind of the same thing. Our cords that connect us here to earth is what's actually being cut. Which then brings you into the parable when Jesus in Matthew 13 is talking to the disciples, and he starts references he talks about the wheat and the tares. Mm-hmm. What are tares? And I know a lot of people, I've done some sermons on this because people don't know what it is.
Right.
Tares are like weeds. Now, if you're from Nebraska, you know a lot about weeds. They take over. It's kind of like if you my dad planted milo and corn, and I remember we had some relatives from the big city, and it was just coming up. It was like that tall. And they look at me and they go, well, how do you know if it's corn and it's milo? And I said, well, to be honest, at that stage, you don't, unless you know when it was planted. It looks the same. You can't possibly know if it's corn or milo until it gets bigger and it gets ready to put out the shoot for the milo or continue for corn. It's the same way with wheat. When wheat's growing, it's like grass in a sense, like oats. It keeps growing, but until it starts producing the chaff for the head, you don't know what is the wheat and what is the weed, the tares. And so Jesus says you can't know. You have to let both the good and the bad grow together, because if you were to go in and start ripping stuff out, you're going to
take out some of the good with the bad. So you have to wait to see if it bears fruit.
Exactly, and that's all those parables when he talks about the fruit and what it bears. That's how we know when you look at somebody, if they're a Christian or not, it's by the fruit that they're bearing. And that's where he's getting at this. So now he's coming in with the sickle, and he's cutting all that. Even the disciples didn't get it. Knowing what he was talking about, they still didn't get it.
No, at the end of chapter 13 in Matthew, that's what they're asking. They're like, can you explain that parable that you just said to everyone out there? We're confused.
It doesn't make any sense. And yet, it should have made perfect sense. So when he's taking this sickle and he's cutting it, or like he's now talking about the vines, I thought this was interesting because we're going to see this, I guess, get in a little bit later of who's doing what of the cutting, but the pressing, that's for olives, the crushing. That's not for grapes. There's some dual imagery here that you leave your head scratching going, I don't know. Right. But Jesus also talked about the separating the sheep from the goats. That can be kind of confusing because, well, the sheep, you could say it would be Israel, and the goats were Gentiles. Sometimes that was shown in other places, but that's not what he's talking about here. No. He's talking about those who are soft for God, who go for God, and the goats are those who
are hard-hearted.
Yeah. If you look at it, you go, no, wait a minute, but in the Old Testament, he used goats. That was like for Yom Kippur.
Right. If they were that bad, then how could they use those for sacrifice? Yeah, it's...
Yeah. Sometimes you can't let yourself get bogged down too much in some of those technicalities, or it doesn't.
But the idea, though, is that there will be a final separation of those who are righteous and unrighteous, those who are saved and those who are not, those who have accepted Christ and those who haven't.
Jesus uses that because, again, he's the great shepherd, and sometimes they had both sheep and goats, and they would come together to drink or whatever, but then when it came time for breeding and all that kind of stuff, there was a separation that happened.
And the sheep will know my voice. They were going to listen and follow him where the goats would not.
Have you been around a goat? Yeah, goats.
They don't listen to anything.
Not really.
Nope. Not even a little bit. So then, on the second portion, the angel comes out with the sickle and harvests. And that's violent and not pleasant.
It talks about them coming in and whacking off the vine, basically, of the grapes. And, of course, this is an analogy. And it talks about this pressing, and it talks about the blood flowing. And a lot of people say that Armageddon, the battle is at
Megiddo.
But, okay, it says Harmageddo, but what's wrong with that whole thing?
Megiddo is only a mountain now because it is layer after layer after layer after layer of civilizations that built on top of each other. So it wouldn't have been a mountain.
And it's called Tel.
Right, it's called Tel Megiddo. But so a lot of times, or a lot of people that we listen to and kind of what we believe, after having been both to Megiddo and to the other place.
Jerusalem.
Right. Spoiler alert, I hadn't told them yet. Way to go.
I won't say that. So Megiddo, okay, the other place.
Because, I mean, it makes sense because there's the Jezreel Valley there in front of Megiddo, so that's what they believe the blood is spilling into the Jezreel Valley and all that stuff. But a lot of people think it's a mistranslation. Not Har Megiddo, but Har Moek. And what is that?
That would be Jerusalem. Which, to me, makes more sense. I mean, that's the whole point.
Because where's Jesus going to come back?
He's coming back at Jerusalem, and where are they coming to him on? Now, maybe, I don't know, and I don't know why you would gather there. We stood there, I'll put up some pictures. Mm-hmm. Megiddo, it's a big flat plain, and I know that Napoleon said that would be he stood there once and said this would be the perfect place for a battle he wished he could ensue. Mm-hmm. I just don't get it. I don't know why, other than there is a Chaldean altar there. I mean, that's where they did it. But I just don't get why
that's
It doesn't have
the significance. That's not where Jesus would come back. That's not where the final battle will be fought. That's not where all of the other battles have been fought to this point in time.
So if you take Jerusalem, and a lot of people think that is really the Garden of Eden. Mm-hmm. If you go back from the very beginning and what is most fought after. So today in my Hebrew class, I thought it was really interesting. We're getting to the point where David now has finally come. This is 2 Samuel chapter 5 and the end of 4 or 5. He comes in to Jerusalem from Judah, and he sets up the city of David. But Jerusalem was not inhabited by Israel. It was actually inhabited by the Jebusites, and they had been there. One could even trace it all the way back, and arguably, to Melchizedek.
Oh, wow.
A priest. Mm-hmm. So this is back with Abraham Melchizedek when he walked through. So they had occupied that part the whole time. It had been taken. Even Joshua didn't overtake it. So it isn't until David comes in and
establishes.
Yeah, and runs them out that it comes back full fold to God. So when Solomon, it's just kind of interesting when you think it's just like one generation. So David takes it over. He does not make his palace in Jerusalem. Mm-mm. He establishes it here. That would be why, because it was already occupied. But then when Solomon builds the temple, that he would build the temple on
the Mount of Olives.
Temple Mount again. Well, it's not the Mount of Olives, but it's in Jerusalem on that part, on Mount Zion. Har Moek, that we believe. But then what did he do just across the way on the Mount of Olives?
That's what I thought you were talking about. He put the temple to Zeus, no? Yes?
Well, it was to Moloch.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Right there. And he put up that Ashtoreth poles, and I mean, it was
on the location, likely where Jesus would be crucified. Resurrected.
But think about this. Who were the players that were pushing for all this? Because they had stayed claim to that area forever, right? It wasn't until David came in and ran them out. Mm-hmm. And they immediately tried to get their presence back in that spot right away. It was just, when we were reading that, I was starting to see the whole thing, knowing that we were going to be talking about this today and seeing that whole history of, oh my gosh, the Israelites didn't have anything to do with Jerusalem until David. And he was 30 years old before he became king, and then he was king for 40 years. But he was 30 years old before he even went into the city of David to establish that. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of mind-blowing when you see this and you go, well, yes, of course, because Jesus comes back at that place and everything happened at this where he ascended from that place. This week's going to be Ascension Sunday. Mm-hmm. Kind of, we're going to be looking at it. You know, why would not that be the area?
Right.
And the Kidron Valley, it's known as
black because it would run black from the blood of all the sacrifice and the slaughter at the temple, of all the lambs and everything that they had to sacrifice there. So it would make sense if that valley has run black from blood before, from sacrifice, that it could happen again at this point in time.
Okay, so if you know, and that's why I said this whole thing about Megiddo, it doesn't make sense because if you know your geography and if you know how Israel is laid out, if Israel is 200 miles from top to bottom, we're talking from beyond Mount Hermon all the way down to the very bottom. Megiddo is over here from Israel, from Jerusalem.
It's not in the right.
It's not in the right area. For it to even flow, it would have to flow from north to south to go 180. It just doesn't fit. Which means, okay, are we again talking more figuratively?
Right.
That it's that deep, but it's talking about the blood. So if all the sacrificial blood had been in that valley, and it's deep. I mean, up to the horses' bridles, that would be a lot. But okay, so not to get bogged down with all of this, but it's talking about the grapes. What color is wine from the grapes usually?
Red. It would run
red. So again, are we talking figurative? But it is the blood from those who are being, but what's being cut is the vine. It's that bottom, but then it's being pressed. What goes through a press?
That's olives.
Exactly. The olives are crushed. But how do you make wine from grapes?
You step on it.
And why do you step on it and not run it through an olive press?
I don't know that I know that answer.
Cool, I do.
Do tell me.
Because grapes had seeds. We have seedless grapes, but they're hybrids.
Oh.
Grapes have seeds, and if you crush a grape, that's why they stepped on it without shoes. Because if you crush the seeds, it made the grape juice bitter.
Yeah, that would make sense.
And then it ruined the wine. So when it talks about this pressing, to me, it's all of this is more metaphoric a little bit,
right.
Because you wouldn't press grape juice.
Right, but you would if you didn't care about what came from it, because this was all bad.
Right.
It was all bitter. Didn't matter anymore.
We are at the end. It doesn't matter. Jesus says in Matthew 13 that when the wheat is cut from the tares, the fruit, that part, the seed, will be threshed from that. That will be spared. But then, what do you do with the chaff, with the leftover straw? It's going to be gathered with all the weeds, and you're going to burn it.
Right.
It's all together. After the fruit's gone, everything else goes into the fire.
Right.
And that's the same thing here. After everything that's left, he's tried, he's saved the grapes, and now it's just all crushed together and it's done with.
Well, and he uses that, I am the vine and you are the branches, but what they were connected to was not him. What they got their essence from and whatever, it was not from him. They had chosen to try to grow and produce fruit from the wrong side of things. So this chapter really encircles the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, because it talks about Christ as the Lamb. I mean, he's referred to as the Lamb all throughout. But then it also shows him as that lion. It shows him for that final judgment. He's all of it. And I think that's the danger that we fall into so much these days, is everybody focuses on his mercy and on his grace and on his love. And while God is absolutely all of those things, he is also judgment and wrath, and there will
holy and reverent.
Oh my goodness. And you take away from his fullness and his wholeness when you only look at part of that, and it's a dangerous omission.
I said that a little bit this last Sunday. So what I was noticing, there are some things, it depends on what denomination you are and the traditions that you've grown up with and the things that mean something to you. For some churches, they do a lot of liturgy. For others, they don't do any. And I've often wrestled a little bit with some of that. Some things, it's like, well, if you're just doing it to mindlessly do it and you don't get anything out of it, I don't think that's right either.
Right.
But at the same time, I found myself questioning and asking, sometimes maybe we get too casual and too comfortable with our worship. And we focus so much on, yay, God's love and grace, and how wonderful it is, and how much He saves us. We don't spend a lot of time on the holiness and on the sanctification and why we are made righteous and why we are made holy. It's only in and through Him.
Right.
And so I wonder, are we not doing enough in that respect?
Sure.
This week we're going to be singing On Holy Ground, and I love that song because it's really easy to just sit there. Sometimes when you sing songs, sing hymns, or we always said the 7-11 songs, everybody sing 7 words 11 times, and you're like, you kind of lose. For me, I kind of lose some of the reference. I like some of those old hymns because, a lot of the old hymns, because of the theology in it and stuff, because it means something, it means that reverence.
And how can you not sing about standing on holy ground and feel that,
And you think from the beginning to the end, in the Garden of Eden, you were standing on the holy ground with Abraham as he was with the priest Melchizedek, and God literally walked through the sacrifice, the holy ground, and then bring it to Moses, where he said, take off your shoes. Not because you need to offer me hospitality. It was because you are on holy ground. And when with Joshua's altar that they found in Israel, it's holy ground. And when we stood on the Temple Mount and so much felt cold and like they kind of missed it. And then there were other places that we stood in Jerusalem that you knew. I just felt like I needed to take my shoes off, like Shiloh on holy ground. Shiloh.
Shiloh for sure.
Grave and Paternoster. Yeah, you get shards of glass at the parking lot up there on the Mount of Olives, but
it's true.
You felt the electricity.
You felt
from the ground.
You felt reverence without even knowing why you should feel reverence, because you could just tell the ground, the very ground, cried out and called out with what had happened there and what will happen there.
Well, and the springs of Gideon, a lot of people, it's like, oh, it's a national park now. No, this was literally kneeling down at that water, knowing that it's not that big of a spot, knowing that you were in the same spot that Gideon and his 300 men were, that knelt the right way. That was a holy ground moment too. It was that kind of that line in the sand in a way, because you knew you were among those 300 that were being called to go with torches and lamps, not swords,
right,
and trumpets. When we went to the Sea of Galilee, that whole area, because Jesus had walked so much of it, it just felt like holy ground.
So many places.
I've had people, even the closest to me, say, why do you want to keep going back to the same place? It's just a bunch of rock. Or, well, I watched it on TV or in your PowerPoint, so I don't need to go there. How do you explain to them you can't until you're there? You can't. It is. It's a bunch of rock, and I had no desire to go before the first time. And now it's like, I can't wait to go back.
And it's one of those things, like everybody, when I went the first time, it's a trip of a lifetime. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I was there for 2 days, and I was like, when can I come back? I mean, I already knew that I wanted to be there again.
It was. The first time I went, they're like, you'll be back. It won't be if, it'll be when. And it's true. There is nothing, you look at America. You look at where we live. We live in Nebraska, and some people think that's probably boring and dull, but we live in more towards the eastern part, and it's gorgeous. You have everything. You have the vegetation from agriculture, but you also have a lot of trees, and you have some hills. May not look like it on the interstate, but you go a couple miles
north or south of the interstate. It's not just that, I promise.
It changes so much. You go to the western part, you get the sand hills, and it's just so much different. And while it looks like the land of milk and honey, and you go over there and it's like, well, now, see, that's the problem. People who have gone there up until just in the last, 10 years, it was just desolate and barren. But that's not the way it looked when Jesus was there. Mm-mm. The way it looked before, it was vegetation and flowers and gorgeous and more water. Mm-hmm. Now it's
like that again.
It's starting to, yeah. It's hard to describe. It's just that feeling in places that you know that it's reverent.
Well, and I think the other piece of it, how can you not be impacted or changed when, I've been reading the Bible my entire life and none of it came to life or meant what it does now until I stepped foot into the places that those people walked. When you stand where Moses got to look out and see, when you've stood where Moses got to gaze into the promised land and know that he was never going to get to go into it, but he at least got to see. We stood on the mountain where more than likely Abraham got to stand with God. How can you not be changed and not want to go back?
And anyone who says that this is not a spiritual battle from the beginning, besides all the references to the angels and the angelic realm, but think about it. Where does Armageddon happen? It does not happen in Russia. It does not happen in Germany. It does not happen in America. It does not happen in Africa. It does not happen in Rome.
It happens in Israel.
And at
that spot,
Mount Zion.
Yeah. It has been a spiritual battle from the beginning, and it will be a spiritual battle at the end.
Like I said, we don't know if that was where the Garden of Eden is. We have no clue what it looked like back then. But of course, it's all lost because of sin, because of the fall.
Right.
And yet that would be, I suppose, why Satan has laid claim to it so hard. Because that was where he got man kicked out. And that's where he took what was gorgeous and beautiful and perfect and turned it to desolation and rock. It's exciting. Even this little bridge chapter, as we start getting into the rest, it packs so much because it really is. In that one little chapter, it's basically the beginning and the end, as you said.
It's got it all.
The Alpha and the Omega.
So if you're listening today, you didn't have to wait for the angel. You're not on a deserted island somewhere. But the time will come when that line in the sand is drawn and it will be too late. So we just encourage you and implore you to not wait. If you are feeling that burning in your heart, if you have questions, if you are at the point where you are ready to accept Christ, do so now and miss all of this horror and everything, because while God's love and grace continues all throughout the tribulation, you don't have to be here for it. And we would much prefer to see you raptured and in paradise
than to have to suffer at the hands of the sickle. Because once you know, you can't unknow, and you can't say, we didn't tell you. Until next time.
Shalom.